Recently, I put up a post on Instagram where I detailed how I improved my athletes' split jerks. There are a number of ways we can take this conversation, but for the sake of the Instagram post, I decided to focus on a few key concepts that I think have a ton of carryover to the actual split jerk, where a number of things are just points of contention or focusing on things that aren't going to develop you holistically. This video is set to outlay and maybe add a bit more nuance to some of the discussion I put out on Instagram. The first thing I discussed was concepts from David Gray's Core Basics. David Gray is someone who's been a really integral part and a huge influence on my own coaching system. If you have a really good biomechanical lens, it can influence the ways that you integrate exercises into your programming and how you coach and just focus on certain aspects in movements. One of the key things that we like to focus on is allowing the rib cage to move. Too often people will focus on what the humerus is doing or look at things like the scapula, where if we can just try and get the rib cage moving and the body moving, it's probably going to be a great thing to integrate into training. So one of the movements that we use from David Gray's Core Basics is an overhead side bend. So you're holding the plate overhead and you're moving laterally. What you want to try and feel is the ribs separate on the opposite side, and you're just going to be performing that movement. You can do a ton of reps in this position. You can start with a lighter weight overhead. For someone who is extremely stiff overhead and reports that they feel really restricted when they try and get their arms over their head in a split jerk, or they're constantly arching and closing down the back of the ribs and can't maintain a stacked position, just side bending is a huge low-hanging fruit and a really easy way to integrate that into a program. You'll be surprised by how many people can't perform a really good side bend. The next thing is integration of Matt McInnies Watson's plus plyo system for our athletes. At our gym, we love using plus plyos concepts. One of those is just the integration of light tier plyometrics. I often refer to this as extensive plyos, so I don't have to always keep tagging Matt in my posts. All this is doing is bringing forward the importance of training your tendons and trying to create quicker ground contact times through various movements. What we want to try and do is focus on the opposite side of the spectrum where we're moving unloaded and trying to move as quick as we can in these positions. Believe it or not, the pogo or a forward leap actually has a lot of carryover to something like a split jerk, where we're trying to move through a really short range of motion and we're loading our tendons in a different way. Our body's experiencing something different, which is another case for the benefit of variability in training. Although it might be more of a muscular push, if they don't have the general physical preparation or the things that underpin that movement, like a fast plyo, then it's going to be really difficult to get someone to just create that quality out of thin air. If we can train it in the system, it's going to be really important, and it's probably going to have huge carryover to the split jerk. The third thing was actually prioritizing your split jerk. So too often people will moan about how their split jerk isn't improving or how their clean and jerk suffers when they perform a ton of cleans and they're always practicing their clean and jerk second and they're doing a lot of snatch volume first. If you actually think about splitting the two movements up, maybe trying to peak within the session. So if you try and drive a lot of movements that are going to potentiate you, whether it is some plyos, some light squats, and then you get into a split jerk quite early on in your session, you're probably going to see a huge carryover. And if you can overload it on something like a block jerk, then when you come back to perform it in a clean and jerk, you're going to be far more successful at integrating those two movements together. The final piece was just using more variations in training. So when you're trying to perform a split jerk, people can often get quite stuck up on what they're doing in the drive, what their feet are doing, what their front foot is doing, and often being bombarded with the same NPC cues. What you want to focus on instead is integrating a number of variations. If you haven't tried behind the neck, I recommend you do that. If you haven't tried playing around with various grips, if you haven't tried using a power jerk or something like a push jerk in your training, or even complexes, which can be extremely useful because you can see how those other variations where someone might be more effective in can carry through to someone who's struggling in a split jerk. So for example, if you're struggling to step your front foot out, more than likely you're not following through in your drive. If you integrate something like a power jerk and split jerk, it's a very common complex that coaches will use to get you to feel that weightlessness of your shoulders, and can be an easy way for you to get the sensation that you want. The final piece that I want to mention is just delaying the press and trying not to have a tense grip on the bar. If you're someone who's wanting to press early and as soon as you dip, everything in the upper body goes into a number of co-contractions and you start to stiffen up, or you're bracing very tightly, it's going to make it more difficult for your shoulders to actually move and do what you want to do in a high speed movement like a split jerk. One of the ways you can do that is by not death gripping the bar and not pressing too early. Hopefully you found this useful. If you did, let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you guys in the next video.